All right, here we are. This is a great, exciting time. I'm here with Carissa. Hello, Carissa.
Hi.
How are you doing? So it's so fun. It's so fun that we're able to connect over this, and I know and chat about kind of how we know each other and through mutual friends and all kinds of things.
Mhm.
And I'm looking forward to getting to know you a bit more and your mission behind why you write and all that you do. But um, why don't we start with just you telling us a little bit about yourself? I know you mentioned that you are a mother of five and homeschooler, which is super exciting. I'm having my first one here very soon. We're hoping to homeschool
Oh,
ours. But
yay.
how is it? I guess how is it being a mother of five?
Yeah. So it's been really great. There's something I think that happens when the first one is definitely, I feel like, the hardest. Some people
Hmm.
tell me the second or third one is the hardest. And I would say three was really hard for me when they were all really young. But now my oldest is like almost 11. And so having a baby with an older child has
Much
been
easier.
total different ball game. So I can see how people could go on to have 10 kids if it was like this. And I can
Yeah.
understand why people that only have three and they're really young are like, you have five kids? Yes. It's a different rhythm in your home when you have olders and youngers
I
versus
can
everyone
imagine
together.
that.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's been great.
Well, that sounds fantastic, and I we probably won't have five. We're starting a little bit late in life, but we do look at we're hoping to homeschool and all of that. And yeah, about this whole thing of interviewing authors is my passion because I really want to talk about the impact and just kind of your mission. I'm very much a passionate person of around the area of impact, changing the world. I've I'm a writer myself and moving into film. And so when you're actually doing things like writing and creativity, I love to hear about that and different people. But changing the world through your kids is probably the most important thing. So I wanted to start there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think in some ways there's a great connection too between writing and raising kids, and that you I write things also because I'm hoping that is something I want my kids to have, right?
Yeah.
So I want them to be able to have this. So if something happens to me, at least they'll have my writing, and they can go back and see some of that, and the things that I would want them to take away from, or if I don't get a chance to teach this to them, then at least I've put it in a book so that
Hmm.
my grandkids could have. So I do see writing as a really great extension of parenting in some ways, of leaving a legacy in a different kind of vein,
Hmm.
because you do get to take whatever the Lord's kind of input in your heart, or put on your heart, and kind of put it, encapsulate it in a format that serves really well longevity wise for future generations.
Yeah,
So
very well said. And if you have any tips, because I think that during this time, it's also good to inspire other people, other authors who maybe are further or earlier along or not as far along as us. And so any
mhm.
tidbits of inspiring people would be very helpful. But I think that we said right there about the longevity is really, really good because yeah, that is changing the world for generations. I actually I had a group this morning, and a bunch of guys get together for breakfast, and they talk about um, not generational wealth, but generational, like, kind of like wealth, like impact. Like they want to buy land, they want to,
Mhm.
do things to bless the multiple generations. And I just feel like that books are, yeah, very much that way. So,
Yeah. Definitely. And I
so
think what's really cool is with this last series that I've been able to write, it's it was that was a big part of the heart of it. It was this I've done 5 books now. The first one was kind of an experiment based on my experience growing up overseas as a missionary kid and interviewing some of my friends that were also like diplomat kids, military kids, all that sort of thing, and a tiny little booklet about our experience and how to understand us better. And then I did a second book that was about a different passion, toxin free, like read ingredient labels, totally different, John, like totally
yeah,
different
very
thing.
important though
But
too.
it's great, yeah. But then this last series has been the one that's I've been working on for the past 3 years. Has kind of, in some ways, I feel like the Lord prepared me for it through those first 2 books of learning telling other people's stories. So instead of telling my own story, I'm telling other people's stories. So I have a series called Becoming Jesus People, and that came about from my godfather telling me stories from the 1960s in your area, the Eugene area,
Yeah.
in a discipleship house down there, and how so many hippies were getting saved. And there was this whole, I don't know, are you familiar with Faith Center?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so this whole series is like the history of how that church kind of got started, how it went from like a bunch of people crammed in this tiny little old church. Volume 2 tackles Roy Hicks Jr.
Yeah.
Story. So I got to interview his wife and his brother and a bunch of people, and kind of piece together, because he's no longer with us, piece together his testimony and how he impacted and went to like this 5,000 people church in the span of like, a year or two, just with so many people getting saved in this Jesus People movement, which
Wow.
a lot of us are probably familiar with that term of the
Yeah.
Jesus movement of the 1960s and 70s. So each book is basically, each chapter was just someone's testimony. And so
Uh,
we just interviewed people, had them tell us are their stories. And then I think what was pivotal for me in this process was then changing it from just like a historical database of stories to more like a first person narrative. So getting to like feel what the person was feeling, or maybe think about what would have they been thinking, what might have they been smelling. So almost like a fiction like style of writing, if that
yeah.
makes sense. It was hard to kind of
Adding
like,
all the imagery and all the things
yes,
that way. Yeah.
and I had, and because I didn't live in that era either, so I had to do some research for that and lean heavily on my co-author. So the first volume I co-authored with my godfather, who was the one that had all these connections, and so getting to tell their stories, and his heart behind that book too was to capture these stories while all his friends were alive still. And we do, two of the people in that first volume have passed on now since telling their story. And so, but each chapter is really great. And I've heard people and had reviews that said that like they have every intention to read one chapter like a day as a devotional
Yeah.
style. And some people accomplish that, but most people just breeze through the book. They're like, I couldn't put it down, which is a great compliment as a writer. You're like, oh, I hope this resonates with you. But yeah, so the first volume was very much a let's capture these stories and preserve them. And so the heart behind that was to preserve in some ways too, just the lessons that were learned in that
Okay.
process. As someone that's younger and still growing up in the church, I like, I would love to learn from the people that have gone before me, right? Of what worked for you in revival. There's lots of
Yeah.
prophetic words about revival coming again. And so what worked in the Jesus people, what was a bad idea, what was a good idea, how did you handle a massive influx of hippies with bare feet and eating watermelon in the pews, and breastfeeding open air, this is just
Yeah. Yeah.
how did
Wild. Yeah.
so how did you manage that, how did you
Disruptive.
navigate that? So those kinds of stories are what I tried and was really hoping to capture for my own sake. I wanted to know, as someone that's growing in leadership, but also for, like we were talking before, my kids and my grandkids. I'd love to preserve these stories and these testimonies, because they're so powerful.
Yeah. It's a lot there.
Yeah.
And I think we might, that's so good. I think that I know somebody also that you may have talked to. So locally, Dan Bousted, I don't know, he was probably in the same area, and now he's down here. And like you said, there's a new revival coming, and let's do it. Let's do it. Not, let's do it. How to say this? We could, yeah, we could learn. Well said. You can learn from different people in the past, and we can actually now maybe further um, that new revival, because yeah, that may look as just as messy as it did back then, maybe even more so for us. And so
Yeah.
what so you said you did it because you wanted to learn, but was there other reasons for you doing this series or
So, yeah. So part of it was since I was about 12, I had a prophetic word over my life about writing,
Hmm,
and as a 12-year-old, I assumed, probably like any other 12-year-old would, oh, like C.S. Lewis and
of
J.R.R.
course.
Tolkien, like I'm going to do fiction, and had a bunch of like non-start fiction projects in high school, and
Yeah.
I did a writing minor in college, but because I wanted to kind of steward that word over my life. And it was one of those words where you get them and it like something comes alive in you. So, I've had a lot of prophetic words in my life, but that one really changed a lot of like internally, it really resonated with me. And I would get repeat words about that from strangers about books and writing books. But I didn't know you could self-publish. So I just assumed when I took my writing for publication class in college, well, this is never going to happen, or sometime way in the future, maybe, you know.
Hmm.
But then in 2019, I listened to Chandler Bolt. Are you familiar with him with Self Publishing School?
Yeah.
Or that's what it was
So,
called back then. Selfpublishing.com, I think is what it is now.
okay.
But they focus more on supporting people with businesses that
That
want to
makes
use their
sense.
book
Yeah.
for towards a business. And I was like, I could self publish, like I could do that. I'm very much a self starter, so I did back in like published the first one right before COVID happened. And so then after that, and it was something nonfiction, right? So as part of my life growing up overseas with other people, stories of growing up overseas and some of those connections there. And so I never thought about writing nonfiction. So for me, this is also just kind of me walking out this word over my life of like, the Lord said to write books. And so this is the natural thing that was presented to me, was to
Hmm.
do these stories. When I was just talking with my godfather, I was like, we could write a book about this. And I was right around the time, was it Jesus Revolution was
Mm.
coming out, that movie.
Yeah.
I said, this is the best time to do it because everyone's going to like be searching on Amazon after they watch that movie for
Yeah.
more stories from this time period. So we cram rushed, like what, we started our first interviews in September and published it in like a few weeks before the movie came, a few days before the movie came out,
Wow. Good for
like a
you.
4 month process. And so, and that one did really well. And so for me, writing books has been not necessarily like a specific theme each time yet. I feel like there's this growing theme in my life of telling other people's stories or giving a voice to people's stories that can't get out there otherwise, or wouldn't know how to write their story or wouldn't know how to write their book,
Yeah.
versus me telling my own story. I will do that eventually,
Okay.
but I
Good.
haven't
Good.
felt
Good.
like the Lord has put that, like the green light on that yet. So I just still trying to steward this theme of like telling other people's stories and getting it out there, since I've been able to do a little bit of a rinse and repeat process. So I don't know if there's a full theme in there other than more of like a direction of like sharing people's stories that are kind of more hidden and that you wouldn't necessarily see.
Hmm.
So that's kind of a heart of mine too, is a lot of these people whose stories are in this series, the Becoming Jesus People book, they're, you know, on their retirement age, they're retiring.
Yeah.
And I heard a lot of them as I was interviewing them be like, I forgot how exciting my own testimony was until I shared it again with you, and how it just kind of reignites a passion in them too, just getting to share it with another generation. And I think part of that too is having grown up overseas and more of a collective culture where family was very important and it was less individualistic. There was a lot of honor placed on the previous generations. And so when I hear their stories, I'm like, you still have a ton to offer my generation, my kids' generation. Like, your time isn't up yet.
Yeah.
So for me, I think part of that was my heart too, of getting to, like I said before, preserve their stories, bring a highlight to their stories, and connect the generations a little bit.
That's really good, and that's something where we connect on because, like, yeah, like I did a lot of coaching, and there's this person coach. He has this book called The Calling Journey, and there's usually 7 stages in the life in someone's life after they accept Christ. It's kind of a Christian thing, and in stage 5 they enter their calling, and usually right around 40 or 50 years old, and then there's these valley seasons that he says, and then the final stage is like the convergent stage, and that's whenever you're able to then everything comes together. You're able to then leave your legacy, mentor other people, all that kind of stuff. And I believe that my calling has always been to find those people who are in that final stage or the conversion stage. That's why I love working with authors and helping them publish their books, because it's like, yeah, leaving your legacy behind. And even if you're not there yet, even if you're still just kind of like living your normal life, it's like you'll be there at some point. So think about, what do you want to leave behind, books wise, and I know that that is something that is passionate for you as well, as you just shared. So that's really really cool. It's a noble calling, I believe.
Yeah.
Have you faced like challenges doing that in telling people stories, and like I imagine they're all so unique in the book.
Mhm. Yeah. So from like a writing perspective, I would say the hardest one was telling someone's story who wasn't alive because that required a lot more research. And in one some ways, if you're just writing your own story, right, it doesn't matter what you say, right? It's you.
Mhm.
It's you,
Yeah.
it's your
There
name.
you go.
But when you're telling someone else's story, like I want to steward that really well, right? I want to get it as accurate as possible and communicate the value possible, but I also have to keep my readers in mind. So
Mhm.
there was a lot of thinking of like what part of this story would capture my reader's attention. So some of that just creative writing questions of like, so I remember when we spent like specifically when I was working on Roy Hicks Jr.'s story, that one felt a little bit intimidating because so many people look up to him, and I fell in love with the guy just learning his story. I was like, oh, I wish I had met this man. You know, I hope he's not going to be upset when I get to heaven and be like, Carissa, why did you write it this way? But so I think that was probably the more challenging thing is finding that balance between creativity and telling a good story and
Yes.
sticking to accuracy and good facts and historical accuracy. And so I had to just kind of have a lot of conversations with the people that I interviewed of like, could I throw this little historical reference in here? And they would have like, because usually they would tell me things like, there was a gas shortage and people were lining up in front of the gas stations because gas was now at like $1 or whatever, which to us doesn't seem like much. But I was like,
Yeah.
this is a really fascinating historical fact. Can I weave this into your story here, even though maybe you didn't actually drive by that gas station
It
in
still
the
happened and still impacted. Yeah.
so things like that, I had to have some conversations with them. And sometimes what kind of my process was like a Zoom interview like this, and that would transcribe it. And then I would kind of make notes of like some key moments in their story because I couldn't tell their whole story, right? If I'm doing one chapter for one person, I can't get their whole life in there. So I tried to pick out key moments that I thought would really resonate with readers, that would be impactful, that still had a
Mhm.
lot of like impact in longevity, I guess, or that would be helpful for somebody that might also be going through something like that. And so I tried to pick out those moments and then also pick out the moments that were really like would capture a reader's attention. So I tried to start every chapter with something like that, you know, that would like grab their attention, whether it was, just even a sensory thing of like the gravel underfoot and the truck passing by because you're hitchhiking, or for Roy Hicks Jr.'s being dumped into a trash can by bullies. And so like that's really like not something you would think about with not a lot of people knew that story. So
Mhm.
that was and I did have a little bit of feedback from a family member with that one of like, oh, is that really where you want to start the story? Because maybe it'd be cooler to start the story when he was younger. So sometimes having to navigate some of different other people's opinions of how you should tell their story.
Mhm.
I really just wanted to honor the heart of the person, what the Lord did, that transformational process, and some of the key things that the Lord taught them in each. So sometimes I think that was probably some of the challenging pieces there was
Mhm.
picking what do I share and what do I not share, and how to still honor the person because I want them to be happy with it. And also just on the creative side, because most of these people are not necessarily writers themselves or have that training.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, but there was this detail and this detail and this detail. I'm like, I don't think the reader needs all those details.
That's
Uh,
yeah. You had to call it "Kill Your Darlings" and write it.
yeah,
It's like, yeah,
there
you
you
love it, but is it really needed?
Yes. So, and it's different if you're presenting it in this format versus if you're going to preach, right? If you're going to preach a sermon versus presenting it in like a short one chapter testimony that has like an arch, you know, a beginning and an end.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I think that was probably some of a challenge for me there was in this past series.
That's really good, and it kind of inspired me to ask maybe a more of a nerdy question,
Sure.
and more technical, because I'm actually working with a client right now as well who's retelling an old story of revival as well,
Yeah.
and I mean same things. Whereas like I encourage him like yeah obviously tell the truth,
Yep.
but if you have to like there's a hero's journey. There's the day that something changes. There's the final battles and all these different things. And oftentimes, that journey exists because God takes us through that journey. It's exists in a fiction for a reason. But I'm like, cut out some things that aren't as important. And maybe if there's a certain moment that is more interesting, embellish a bit more in that one. And it's like, of course, still make it true, but spend more time in this area because it's more interesting.
Mhm.
So I guess my question, and maybe for even for authors who are watching, maybe to help them out too, like what did you find was a good place to start? And was there like a rising action in these stories, overcoming final battle? I mean, did you go into all that in these short little stories, or yeah?
Yeah, so that's a good, yeah. So I tried to uh start their story out where usually at a pretty low moment, or some of these key, I always asked my people what were their like key moments leading up to their decision with Christ. So I always start the chapters out, except for in this I try to find what is like the turning point moment for them of like where did life really change. And for some people, what's interesting is there were steps to that. It wasn't like this like black and white moment.
Yeah.
Although for a lot of people it was, but for some people it was more of this like slow growth thing. So for me, finding that rising action piece, I tried to find some themes. So sometimes there would be, and what's really beautiful is I feel like the Holy Spirit met me in that process too, of being like, here's the theme here
Hmm.
of what was going on in their life. And so sometimes I would ask the person in like the interview like this of like, it kind of sounds like this was going on, or this is the theme that was kind of the Lord was, and they'd be like, oh yeah, no, that like from an outside perspective looking in, yeah,
Hmm.
that would make sense. So then I would try to pull out the pieces of their story and highlight those things that would connect with that theme. And so that was part of it, maybe a little bit like a flow with the Holy Spirit type of process in
Yeah.
some ways. But usually that decision moment for in general, there would be a decision moment with Jesus. And so that would be kind of my climax, right? Of how did we get there and
Yeah.
where were they were before. Here's the climax. And then I didn't want to leave the reader there. I want to see what happened a little bit after that. And at the end of each chapter, I
Yeah.
put a little paragraph of like, where are they now? And I've heard so much feedback that that is like one of people's favorite things to read is the little tiny paragraph at the end that says they're still following Jesus 50 years later, and they've
Still
got
burning.
four
Yeah.
kids, and they have a church over here, and they've planted 100 churches or whatever. So people love reading this little hero journey, this short little journey, and then getting another paragraph. I did get some feedback that said that this was, well, I want to see more of the struggle, but that wasn't necessarily the highlight of this series as much as just the transformation and like kind of alluding with the title, like becoming Jesus people. Like, how did they become a Jesus person? And then in the third volume, which wrapped up my series, I did take a little bit more time. Sometimes I had found like an opportunity to do like an epilogue that showcased someone else's, like they'd tell me part of their story in the interview that happened after this time period, which doesn't really fall into the book, but I felt like it was really important and valuable, especially in volume 3, the epilogue. So I kind of drop us back in, the reader back into a moment with one of our characters, so to say, when they're like they've just gone through a really terrible like their wife has died, and they're like wrestling with God in their apartment for 3 days straight, and come out of it. I was like, that is really powerful. Like there's a lot of people that I think could resonate with that. I want to include that, but because it didn't fit the format of what I had been doing in the chapters, I put it in like an epilogue. It's like an extra thing. So for me, that was kind of how I found the rising action and the story within a true memoir type story was where were they at the beginning? What were some of those seeds that led up to this culmination of understanding Jesus,
Mhm.
even if sometimes it
Mhm.
was after a salvation experience or a secondary one? Um, and then kind of give the reader a little blurb at the end of where are they now. That's like the happily ever after
Yeah.
note.
Like, did you still start like on the day that something changed in some ways in people's lives? I'm trying, yeah, like,
The day, so I do put dates in there, so I would put like headings of like different years so the reader could kind of say, oh, this is like a year later or
hmm
this, and then really tried to get into the emotion of things. So I
hmm
tried to pull on a lot of like, well, what did that feel like? And some people like, did that feel like peace to you? Did it feel overwhelming? There was different examples of a lot of people felt like there's some really crazy stuff in there too of like someone coming into a church that was high and then it just disappears, like the
Oh,
high just goes away, like, and they're like, what? And then they have this interaction with Jesus. Or sometimes there was one Joe in the second story, he was really interested. I remember this more because I wrote it one way that was a little bit more fantastical,
wow.
like, oh, I felt this like presence of God walking home, and then he's like, Carissa, I never felt anything. It was just, there was no feelings whatsoever. I just made a choice. I was like, okay. So then I went back and I fixed that, so that it would be more accurate, because I thought that was actually a poignant like point to highlight of like, hey, he made this choice without there being any like fanfare
Yeah.
whatsoever. And so, because like sometimes people think it's just this massive emotional experience, but sometimes it's just a choice. So there was variety. If that answers your question, there was
Yeah.
variety there, and but I did try to follow a pattern and a timeline. uh,
Hmm.
but for each person was a little different based on what was going on with their story.
Yeah, and it sounds like it. Yeah, and like everyone's life is different, and it's you're mining these amazing stories. Yeah, usually it's like the day that something changes that's how good stories, in
Mhm.
my experience, start, and then they go on the noble journey, and then they do the struggle, and then they overcome their lives, this kind of thing. It sounds like you kind of had to like push a lot of that together, and but you know, it and not necessarily show like. I'm sorry you showed some struggle, but it's more like kind of maybe for those fiction nerds out there or whatever, like a mirror moment where like the person knows they need to change or something like that, but they don't know how to maybe, and then kind of that journey of that potentially.
I always started again with something that would hook the reader in, right?
Hmm.
So whether that was, so it usually wasn't like, oh, they were born here and then they went to church and then they got into drugs and then this. I tried usually drop the reader into a difficult moment,
Yeah.
and then I did a lot of flashbacks. So I would catch the
Okay.
reader because I tried to stay first person, right? So I did a lot of flashbacks, and I found that was interesting. That was a little hard for the people I interviewed to catch that, because they'd be like, wait, that happened before. Why isn't that in before? But I was like, no, I'm trying to, if you can put yourself in like
Journey.
the
Yeah.
reader's shoes, like this is they see the car and they're remembering that car is making them remember this. And that's how I'm catching the reader up on all this stuff that has happened. So I would do things like that to help kind of consolidate that time frame. But yeah, I did try to have a little bit of that arch of like something is not so great, and then leading up to this other piece. And I also tried to highlight, depending on the story, some of those seed moments that happened of like, oh, maybe there is a God, or now I'm out in the wilderness and I might die, and the only thing I can think of is the memory verse my mom made me memorize when I was a kid, and
It's
I've been
real.
following the Lord forever, but that's what's coming to my mind. And then they meet someone else, so you see like these little seed moments that lead them to
Mhm.
a decision or to a reevaluation or a better understanding of their own faith.
Which is so cool too, because yeah, I predominantly write fiction. I'm working on a nonfiction story myself right now, of my own life. But predominantly writing fiction is you don't have the luxury of telling those things because people don't believe them. But
Mhm.
it's like if it's real, if it's nonfiction, it's like no, this happened. Like it's it's unbelievable. Like you said, like it's like, oh, I just made a choice without any feeling, or these moments that seem fantastical, but it's like, well, no, the truth is stranger than fiction, right? Sometimes.
Yes.
And the problem with and I'd say the problem with fiction is it has to make sense, and
Mm.
because usually nonfiction doesn't have to make sense because it actually happened. So
Yeah.
that's pretty wild. Um, yeah, and so I guess another question, and one of like about all of this, maybe taking it a little bit further out, but like because you're mom of many, five, probably four at the time, or
Yes.
maybe. How did you like? I guess what?
Just had one 4 months old. So
Okay, yeah. So how did you like juggle that and like as far as your creativity, with your daily life, and is there anything that you like kind of learned during this time and yeah, just.
Yeah, no, those good
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
I do get that a lot from people of like, well, how do you do that? And you
Mhm.
probably get this too of like, I could never write a book, and people don't necessarily realize it
It's not that
actually is
hard.
hard.
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
You need the right guidance and the right coach, you know.
Yes, if you have and if you have the like, I would also say something I've realized about myself too is if I set a goal, I'm very much likely I love to accomplish a goal. So
Yeah.
that was really key for me when I read that little, it's called published, is Chandler Bolt's book. That's all
Yeah.
I read. I read that and I just followed what it said and I did it and it worked. So then once you've done it once, it feels, you, as you've probably experienced this a lot, you get a lot more confidence to do it more often. So for
Yeah.
me, I did, with being a mom, the first book I came out with was right around the time I was shifting seasons. And so that helped a lot. I've always been someone that likes to do other things than just be the homemaker. So I think we mentioned a little bit before the call that I worked in film and commercials and stuff like that behind the camera, behind the camera,
Same.
before having kids.
Yeah.
So once I had kids, I found little ways to keep my brain occupied and busy. And so then once I moved into writing was after I was closing down a business with a business partner out in Beaverton who was moving to Florida. And that was, I was moving into homeschooling. So I was like, season shift. Hey,
Yeah.
writing is a little bit easier to do because I could do it within different nap time. I could do it this time. It's not like time
Makes
constrained.
sense. Yeah.
Like it has to be 8 to 5 or whatever. So that was helpful for me, is just finding pockets of time, usually during nap time, sometimes in the evening. When we did that big push to get that one book out before the movie came out, that was so technically that would have been, I had published 2 books within the span of like, I released one in September and then another one in February. So that was like 2 books in a year. That was a lot. So I now have gotten to a pace of like about 1 book a year. They're not very
Oh,
long. In like
great.
fiction, you're doing a lot bigger word count. For me, it's like, a 40,000 word count. So it's not too much.
Hmm.
And so I would find nap times with the second book. I even took I didn't have a nursing baby. So I took 2 weekend trips down to Eugene because I also wanted to be in the space, right? Be in the space, be in that church. Or someone, they took me a tour around the old Faith Center. As Steve Overman took me around. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but and some of the other people that were there during that
Was
time
that
period.
on Polk Street? Or
So
down,
is
like
it
kind of like
third?
Seventh Street. I don't know if that's the old one per se. It's hard to
The
be.
old one was on 18th. It was only there for a little while. And then
Okay.
I think this one is across from an SDA church. It's a really big campus now.
Okay.
I can't remember the cross streets, but
Oh yeah, I think I know that one.
yeah,
Okay.
it's called Eugene Face Center. They had a
Yeah.
lot of offshoots because it just got too big. So there's like one in Springfield now, which a lot of the stories in my volume 3 came from the Springfield
Nice.
Faith Center people. So for me, that second book was that one I got up, I think up to 60,000 words. That was a big book. That was the one I wrote the volume 2 and 3 by myself, but my godfather still made the introductions for me because he was the one that had all the friends. But he's like, I don't think I want to do the writing part again.
Yeah.
So I did that. So it was a lot more wordy because he was much better at simplifying people's words, and I'm more verbose in my writing. But I found going for, so kind of like a writing retreat, and that gave me a good 8 hours. It's amazing what a mom can do in 8 hours with no interruptions. So
Yeah. That.
did that
Yeah.
a couple 2 weekends, I think, and then I also just put it in my calendar. So I would say Carissa in our family calendar shared with my husband. We put it in the calendar, and he's just been really supportive, and we talk about it ahead of time. And I would always start kind of with like my goal, like publication date, and work backwards of like, okay, I know I'm going to need to interview this many people, and then I know I'm going to have to draft for about this amount. So I started to get better at anticipating the time I would need and then
Okay.
plugging it in of like, oh, this Saturday I can do this because we don't have anything and my husband's home. So I can do like a good 6 hours here. Here I can only do 1 or 2 because of nap time. And then I have other things in my life that I'm doing. So I just scattered it out and planned it out and put it in a calendar. And that seemed to be the best way that worked for me as a mom, at least to get things done.
Well done, and it worked out. So like I know you also like blog and share. Do you share any of this your experience there? I glanced through it. Do you share tips or about this, or is it mostly about homeschooling?
Yeah, so for me, I'm like I'm not at a place where I'm like full-time author, right? Because I'm
Hmm.
homeschool mom, just had a baby, so I haven't even been doing much with like book stuff until this month because now the
Hmm.
baby's 4 months old. As far as blogging goes, I haven't done. I do a lot more of like what is it like micro blogging on Facebook. That's a
Okay.
lot more easier for me. So, and then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll copy what I have on Facebook and then post it on my website
Perfect.
because not as many people actually come across the website, right? The website's more just as a it gives me some credibility there, and it's a place to put all my content, and when I'm doing podcasts or something like that, a way to connect with people. But when I'm more consistently engaging with readers would probably be social media. And so for me, what works best has been just like micro blogging posts. And so for me it can be a variety of topics. I'm not super great at like honing in on this particular thing or this particular thing. Sometimes it'll be homeschooling, sometimes it'll be parenting, or sometimes it'll be writing, sometimes it'll be something just that I'm discovering or the Lord's working on in me that I kind of like to share and just be vulnerable and post about. So I would say it's kind of like more like a micro blogging on social media is more of where I'm consistently showing up and engaging with other people. I
Great.
don't do as much of the I people will ask me about writing books, and I love sharing because I love sharing things that I've learned,
Hmm.
but I think that's definitely more your forte of
Yeah, send them
supporting.
over to me. I'll take care of
So,
them.
yep. So I love to when people come up to me and be like, "Oh, will you tell my story?" I'm like, "Why don't you write your own book? That would be
Hmm.
lovely. I'm about to have a baby." And
Which is
so then,
Which is great because I'm actually I haven't been doing this for I've had a dream and I'm just now
yeah,
starting it where I'm moving into anthologies where I'm gonna be mentoring people to write a chapter themselves over a year. And so
okay,
so I'll like teach how to write a story, how to write teaching on that, how to do application, how to do marketing, and just kind of teach it over the years. So if you have people that are asking that, we're starting up anthologies here pretty soon, maybe one or two a year, but.
perfect.
It's a side note, but yeah, so is that the best place then for people to kind of follow you then? Like, is it the
Yeah,
blog
social
or
media right now is probably the best. So Facebook, Instagram is where I'm at. I've been trying to dabble with like TikTok Reels as a way of pulling some marketing to books. I haven't done some recently, but I've been collecting content.
Mm.
But actually sitting down to edit because right now I've just been kind of in the middle of gearing up for homeschool. So for me, I will feel like my author journey and my author space right now is a little bit in flux as I have to navigate other priorities in life at the moment.
Well, you're just doing a great job. Speaking from, from experience and some people, people don't always pursue their dreams and so at least you're doing it. And yeah, like it's just some advice, just even just not to you, but to people watching in some ways, it's just like even a little bit is enough. It's fine, it's like just move forward and it's never too late and just don't think like you need to be like somebody else or I have to write like somebody else, but just moving forward and those pockets of time, that's really well said. But I just want to say the website is the homefrontblog.com, right? Okay.
Yes, my website is
Okay.
thehomefrontblog.com.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're almost done. Anything else you want to say? I also want to hear about what you're working on next, and what
Oh,
your next
yeah.
adventure is. Yeah.
Well, I think, for me, I would say just like as an encouragement to anybody that's listening is just, like you were saying, those little things can make a difference. Like one person, I think I heard this from a social media coach one time is 1% changes like compounded over a year make a big thing. So just finding little 1% things that you can do to go after whatever the Lord has called on you, whether that's writing a book or creating a course or, teaching something that's really huge, or scripts, whatever it is, music, finding
Mhm.
those pockets of time. And it's amazing too if you really set a goal can be really helpful too. I would say, if you could take something away from our conversation today, it would be, find a goal, reverse engineer it backwards, and find those little pockets of time. We all have them, whether we think we do or not. We all have little
Yeah,
pockets there.
it's often we blame external circumstances, but oftentimes we're internal. We have to fight the internal battle of that we do have that we believe and we do have time. And yeah, you speak on a lot of things. I give my clients three things to do. It's habit, And I tell people, yeah, you can do anything for a minute a day, And so if it's just a minute thinking about your book or writing, just do that for that minute and be consistent, right? The habit is really important. And then deadlines, yeah, accountability, like you mentioned, it's that. And then you also did the same thing about the third one is I don't know what to call it, but it's like that longer period of time, like you said, the writing retreats, or for
Mhm.
some people, like just get away at a coffee shop for an hour or 4 hours if you can, but like that longer period of time. I know for Christians, especially, and it's that like letting the Holy Spirit come in and like actually breathe on it. I know not people may not have a lot of time, may not have a whole weekend, like sometimes, but just getting away for a period is really important. So
Yeah, no, those great. Yeah, and as
yeah.
far as what I'm working on next is because of some of the demands coming onto my life for this homeschool season will be a little bit more demanding this year than previous. I probably won't be publishing in February like I have every year, so it'll be pushed out a little bit. But I'm hoping to publish a book for a nonprofit locally that has asked me to
Very
write in
cool.
a similar style as what the ones that I have here on my back wall, the Becoming Jesus People stories. They had reached out to me after reading it and asked if I could write some of their testimonies from their ministry in that style. So I'll be working on that, and then hoping to tell some stories of some wives that whose husbands have gone through a prison and wrongfully accused. In the legal system for crimes they didn't do, and how do they navigate that with their faith, because it was one of those things that just happened in my life where multiple friends went through something like that, and I was like, this is not a coincidence. Why do I know so many people that are going through this, and learned a lot. So hoping to highlight their stories and the future. So I've got a couple projects in mind in the future, still in that vein of telling other people's stories that may not be able to tell it
I
themselves.
love that. It's championing the underdog, and that's something that, it's where we overlap as well. I mean, and I do this whole thing about like helping people find their life themes as well, and maybe we should check it out and do that. But like based around movies, like, and I
Mm-hmm.
love movies like Lord of the Rings and Greatest Showman, and it's this thing about not having your own act per se, but championing other people's act, and it sounds like you have a similar theme. And do you
Yeah.
want to ghostwrite as a profession? Is that interesting to you, or is yeah.
Go straight, as in.
Meaning like writing like for other like people what you're doing, like
Oh, like do it. Yeah. So I feel like it's, at least right now, that's what I'm doing.
yeah.
And I just had a
Oh,
child come into
yeah.
the room. This is
Well,
real life, guys. This is
which is
real
fine.
life.
We're about at the time anyway.
Yes. But yeah, I think eventually I would like to tell my own story, and I
Yeah.
don't know, maybe I'd like to do fiction someday too. But
Mm.
just kind of following, the Lord's leading on the right seasons and what's going on in my life, for right now, at least. So yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for being with us. Thanks for,
Yes, thank
you're doing
you.
a great job telling people's story, championing others, homeschooling, pockets of time. A lot of good tidbits today, and
Great. Yes. Thank you
yeah.
for having me on. I appreciate it. It's great to connect with you and get to know about you too. And yeah, love getting to share what you guys are doing when I run across those other people that want a little bit of extra help with their writing journey.
Perfect. Glad to have them. So yeah, we just bless you and bless whoever's watching this, and even if it's years in the future, they're still watching. I bless you, watcher, and I bless Carissa, and just yeah, it's always fun. So you have a great mission and a great journey, and I do want to hear your own story too at some point. That'd be fun. So
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Jesse.
welcome.